like I would say 90+% of the people, they didn't know what the definition of their conversion rate was. It was very clear they needed analytics. They did not need CRO to start. No, let's take a step back. Let's do so that's where it caused me to go and learn analytics to a deep level. And that still is usually the case today. People run to optimization. We all want to run to it. But if we're not clear on what we're optimizing and why and all that historical data, having confidence in that, that's the key part.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Ecommerce Traffic and Conversion Podcast. I'm Scott Branley and I'm here with my co-host DJ Sprague and our special guest today, Ryan Levander. Ryan, how are you doing, my friend?
Hey, doing fantastic, guys. It's a Friday here. It's pretty sunny in Denver, so hey, no complaints from me. Appreciate being on.
You bet. It coincidentally, it's Friday here in Utah, so don't know how that happened. But we synced up on that. So I just wanted to do a quick introduction to you, Ryan, for those who don't know you. Ryan Levander is a technical marketer passionate about helping SaaS and e-commerce businesses reach revenue goals through analytics and experimentation. You can tell us more about experimentation later. As the founder of Rednavel Consulting, Ryan helps businesses remove uncertainty from the decision-making through his marketing measurement framework. As measurement gets more complex, the strategy becomes more important, which is Rednavel Consulting's specialty. So we're super excited to have you on board today because obviously with analytics changing and AI in the mix, and you're very familiar with both, we'd love to share some of these concepts with the audience.
Absolutely. Yeah, I kind of got my background initially in analytics way back, probably close to a year ago. Working at a car dealership. At the time, I needed a job, and it was kind of my first job, outside of college. And I really realized that I became pretty passionate about the analytics side of things because I didn't really like cars. Ironically, I didn't even own a car at the time. I just owned a bicycle. And so I was needed the job, working at a dealership, and I saw the power in being able to, show the owners of the car dealership, hey, this is what's actually happening on your website. These are actually the people coming to the site. This is the story, and this is what you should do as a result of this. It wasn't my opinion. It was an opinion formed based off of the data, but I had a reason to speak up at those weekly meetings. I'm the data guy, and so I realized I really saw the power with that, and I realized it was much more of like a business development a vehicle that I could apply to other business models too, and not just car dealerships. And business models actually was a little bit more passionate about, and that's kind of where I am today.
Usually you've got somebody that's like super nerdy that like just dives into the analytics side, and but it's rare to find somebody that does that plus has the vision on the business side to make the connections. So that's cool.
As you may remember, I think I told you, but I spent a couple of decades in the automotive space, manufacturer and franchisee dealer side. And that's a interesting little, area of expertise that you and I both share. How is measurement getting more complex these days, Ryan? Can you tell us, some of those nuances and gotchas and how you're helping your clients address these new complexities?
Absolutely. I think there are three key ways it's getting more complex, three key sort of like broad topics. One is pretty clear and present. It's the privacy, it's the consent side of things. It's not really an option for a lot of businesses to say, oh, we're just going to ignore this. Of course, you can do that, but there's going to be repercussions if you do that. Of course, that's more of a thing in Europe right now, but it's just a matter of time before it makes its way over more stateside. And that's complex because there's like different aspects. It's not just black and white of, oh, this is the country law, because there's state laws, and the user has the right too. The user says, hey, I want you can rent my data for a while, but now I want you to redact this. So I kind of look at it as like users can allow you to rent the data before you used to just get it always, basically, back in the, Facebook and Cambridge Analytica days. And the browsers have their own rules too. So, if you're using Safari as an example, it's just going to automatically, redact cookies after a week. If you're using a Brave browser, there's no none of that at all. So that's the more complex area is privacy. What that means for us as marketers is we're going to have less data. There's never a scenario where you're going to have more of it. So it has to be more about trends and patterns leading to a useful truth. We can't use the A word, I like to call it. We can't use accuracy because that really, it never has existed, and it's only going to get worse as time goes on. So it's about the trends and patterns. And then the second thing is tools like GA4. Obviously, Google Analytics is one of still the biggest players out there. Those tools are getting, I would say, more complex, and also there's just less less great adoption with the rollout. I think there's a lot of UI things that people don't like about the interface. So you're going to need someone who's a bit more technical on the setup because it's an event-based model. Again, kind of with the privacy too, there's more things to be concerned about. It has to work with your privacy tool as do all the other things. And so GA4 just tends to be a little bit more complex. Like I still remember the survey form that Google sent out like 5 years ago at this point when they were developing GA4. It was a survey for developers. And that was like one of the big, not red flags, but one of the big things of like, this was always meant more for developers. Like they got developer feedback on the product and they never really got a lot of marketers feedback on GA4. And so that probably explains the way GA4 still is today. So it is more technical. I feel like you need to use things like Looker Studio, previously known as Google Data Studio, to make things more visually apparent on what you should do next with your marketing. So that's the other aspect that's harder. And then we just have more data to work with. Yes, there's a little bit less on the privacy side of things, but there's just so many more sources of data to ingest. You have your search, like just if we look at search, right? Your search consoles, your Google Trends, your third-party SEO tools, your Ahrefs, and then you have ads. We have so much data, sometimes it can feel paralyzing. And that's where I think while you need to have better technical chops than ever, I still think the strategy part is becoming more and more and more important to know, should I even be concerned about server side? And what percent of my reports I'm looking at are we actively testing? So I think there's a healthy mix of strategy and technical pieces that's really thrown us for a curveball in the last 2 to 3 years. It's kind of, I embrace it because I, just like with AI, I like the change. It kind of, I feel like, it's like oil and water, right? It like separates the best marketers and the ones who are kind of just starting out. So I think it's a healthy change, but it is causing us to have to do more work. And there's, so that's the reality of where I see things lately.
Yeah. With everything becoming anonymized, working with your clients, like, is that a concern for them? Or are you able to somehow get around a lot of that?
Yeah, I think it's a good question because, some things like we work with some SaaS businesses and they'll have some subdomains, and usually SaaS is more solution based. So SEO is more of a channel. And so, for example, if they want to understand, top landing pages, and if those originate on subdomains, you just have to use BigQuery. Like there's no way around something like that to understand original landing pages, especially when the user journey goes across different subdomains. A lot of times there's documentation or support or all these different subdomains. And it's like, you literally just can't do it in the interface. And sometimes even if you can, there's a bunch of not sets in the interface. So that's not helpful either. A bunch of not set or a bunch of, sampling or cardinality in GA4. And so whether it's anonymized from like, you don't know who this person was, well, you never really do in an analytics platform. You shouldn't at least have PII in there. And oftentimes you don't need that. But what's worse, I think what you kind of meant by the anonymized is around like we don't know, the channel originating source or those sources. And so you're going to need to use BigQuery and or server side to be able to have a more acceptable match rate in knowing where those originate from. So, and that's where it kind of also bleeds into, I think, the qualitative side of things. I think I did a webinar last week where I don't think it's optional anymore to just say, if I just do really good quantitative analytics, like server-side GA4, use BigQuery, use Elevar, use all these things, which I think you should do. But I think you need to supplement that with different forms of qualitative research, self-reported attribution, regular surveys, review mining, because that's going to unlock more of the why which is a lot more powerful than the what and the how, which is what the quantitative will tell you. So I think it's a yes and approach.
So that seems, you're talking about a lot of different tools. That seems overwhelming, right?
Can be.
How do you help people? How do people, get over that overwhelm? Like, where do they even start in analytics?
That's a great question because it is overwhelming. The good news is that you don't really have, you probably have to pay a little bit of money, maybe with something like BigQuery, right? If you have a lot of data to store, et cetera, but the storage is usually very, very cheap. But the good news is that Google provides you with all these tools for free. And honestly, I'm not an advocate for Google or anything. I still have frustrations with some of their products for sure, like GA4. Love and hate it. There's things that I can do in GA4 that I can never do in Universal Analytics. So it's not all bad for sure. But the good news is that, using something like Google Tag Manager, Google Analytics, and Looker Studio, if you can master those three tools, you can level up your measurement and your actions in your marketing like most people aren't even realizing they can do. So it's incredibly powerful. And, like I usually say with this is GA4 is as powerful as your setup. So if you say GA4 sucks, you're kind of saying, your setup sucks, like your implementation sucks. And so you can say that if you want to, it's not going to do much help. What a lot of people try to do is look for that push button simple answer. Like, I'm just going to get Pubic Pro, or I'm just going to get Modabo or any other tool. They feel like if they pay money, it's going to be more out of the box. And I think you should honestly probably just give up that ghost. Like, that's just not a reality. There's probably going to be a quicker start time of like, okay, I have some built-in reports. These are a little more useful. That could be true. But at the end of the day, you want to take your business questions, like just pure business questions, and map those into your analytics tool, whatever you're using. And that's going to take a custom setup, period.
Yeah. The thing about GA4 is it's not nearly as easy to get started and set up, but it does have more flexibility in terms of customization and mapping out the path, et cetera. But like you said in the beginning, it's not for the faint of heart, because it does take more time and more understanding of how to get more out of the tool. Where
absolutely
it's more simple, or check the box type thing, but you have to be more in it now to win.
Yeah. I don't think Google Tag Manager is really optional anymore. I think you kind of need to use that if you want to get more out of your analytics. That's kind of like the non-negotiable nowadays. But I like what you said about the user journey too. That's another little kind of an easy way to start, and like a quick tip is I always start like with our marketing measurement framework. It's plan, build, launch, forecast, and optimize. And so most people, they skip the plan phase either altogether, or they just don't do it in depth enough. And how I always start that plan phase is I map the customer journey on at least the website journey. Obviously, it can start offline, but we can't track that stuff, right? So, just like an e-com site, they're usually pretty linear. Not always the homepage, but homepage eventually, a PLP, a PDP, an add to cart, and then the checkout experience, and then the thank you page ultimately. And so I just started in Lucidchart, and I just put rectangles and I map this, and there's usually some custom flows too. But then I just take that image in Lucidchart, I import it into Looker Studio, and then I just put numbers above those steps so we can really quickly see, all right, this is what we expect the user journey to be. And then here's the numbers, here's the actual numbers above those steps. And so I think it's a good way to think like, these are our expectations, and then are we meeting those expectations? And then of course, you want to know by traffic sources. So source, medium, campaign are up there too. So you could filter and then everything changes. But usually that's a good way to start, is mapping the customer journey. Because I think we're all visual people. And if we could see a funnel, it's pretty easy to say, hey, here's the drop off.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know you gave an example of Looker at the conversion conference. I think it was last year. Could you tell the audience a little bit about Looker as a tool, what it does, and how it can be useful in mapping their buyer journey and getting better insights and analytics?
Absolutely. And this is one of the things that I don't like about Google is they are terrible at naming things. Of course, they name things like events in Google Tag Manager. There's just, the event is probably the most overused word in marketing in general. But also Google complicates things with how they name things. And so for one, they never should have called it GA4, I like to say, because it's just so different than Universal. They should just called it a completely different name because people are expecting it to be just like Universal was. But with Looker, the problem is, so there's Looker, which is a paid dashboarding solution. I don't know the pricing on that, but that's the paid one. That's not the one I use. I use Looker Studio, which is their free version, formerly known as Google Data Studio. So that's the one I use. And now they also have Looker Studio Pro, I believe it's called, which is not quite as expensive as Looker. It's right in the middle. So anyway, just to clarify, I'm referring to Looker Studio, and it's the free tool, and it allows you to, again, kind of be as powerful as you make it, really, for the most part. And it can especially be more powerful if you're using BigQuery, because then the load times are going to be super fast. Usually one of the pain points with people when they get into Looker Studio is, oh, this takes forever to load. And like, that's just not someone who probably doesn't know how to set up Looker Studio. But one of the big tips I have with Looker Studio is pages are free, charts are not. So don't make your pages really long. That's a great way for things to load really slow. Keep you focused. I usually have like a question outside of the actual dashboard. What's the question we're trying to answer? And then answering the question on the like canvas of the dashboard. And I usually use scorecards, like that's the chart name in Looker Studio. And I take those scorecards, and like I mentioned, they're just rectangles, right? It's usually linear at the steps. And so first step is a PLP, product listing page. Next step, product detail page. And then you can build a funnel to say how many people. You can build an open or a closed funnel, right? So you could say they had to start at the PLP and then go to the PDP, or they could enter at any point of the funnel. But that really gives you a visual. I like to start with an open funnel because that's just the reality of maybe you're running ads directly to a PDP. But that way I can see the user flowing in and out. And we did this for a client recently, and we saw just how many people were not adding to cart on the PDP. Like everyone was it was like a traffic jam. Like everyone goes to the PDP. And that's my favorite thing to do, is use data to visualize something. And then I went to the PDP and took a deeper look at it. And I realized there was like 4 or 5 different contrasted CTAs. It wasn't just an add to cart. And so I was like, okay, we're kind of competing for attention here. And that's probably why it's not happening. And so then it led, okay, we need to track all these other things we're asking them to do, basically. So,
yeah. Great example. Thanks for sharing that.
So what do you see the role of AI being in analytics and reporting? How is that playing out in your space?
Yeah, I'm actually going to be chatting with Jim Stern on this in a couple of weeks in the Marketing Analytics Summit. So I guess shameless plug for generative AI for marketers if you haven't signed up for that one yet. But it's fun because I see it as powerful, but also dangerous if you're not, especially if you're not, I guess this is the rule with anything with generative AI. If you aren't a subject matter expert on the topic you're using it for, make sure you have an expert in the loop. Otherwise, everything is going to look like gold that it recommends to you. And so I think that's the important part. So there's a few things that I think it's beneficial for. I think it's great. Usually in that planning stage, you're asking business questions of these are the questions we want to answer, right? Conversions by different users, AOV, products, all these things. Once you have your question set that you're, sort of wanting to go find with your data, or either set up to be able to answer that, or just transform your data to be able to answer those questions, I would give that to ChatGPT. Of course, no sensitive or whatever tool you want to use, but no company data, but just these are the questions. Hey, I'll just use ChatGPT as the example. Hey, ChatGPT, these are our questions we're looking to have answered. I would say, ask me questions about my business so you have better context on what you need in order to supplement or think of other questions that I may not have already asked. So I think it's a great ideation tool for your questions to begin with, because based on different business models, et cetera. I would say it's really helpful. It's helped my whole team a lot, myself and my data scientist on my team, to be able to either generate SQL once the data is already in BigQuery. Now they have Gemini inside of BigQuery, so you generate it right inside of BigQuery. We use it a lot in Google Tag Manager. Sometimes there's complex stuff on the site we want to be able to track, and you can basically feed it different parts of CSS selectors, JavaScript. You can feed that to ChatGPT and say, this is what I want to track. You give it, your context, of course. And then the beauty part of that is you can, before you turn it live, you can actually test it in Google Tag Manager Preview to make sure, hey, this is actually working. Or if it doesn't work, tell ChatGPT what it got wrong, give it the error codes, because a lot of people are just like, oh, it didn't work, it got it wrong, and they stop. It's like, well, no, tell it what it got wrong and it will correct itself and it will get it right. And the beauty part of that is you don't have to publish it until it's exactly how you want it. So there's really no excuse to not use it in some things like that when you don't have to be a JavaScript developer, but you do have to be able to QA and make sure it's correct. And so the last piece I would say is it's helpful maybe in some different visualization types. I think it's used to be called code interpreter. Now it's data analysis or something like that. But you can give it a healthy, CSV file and say, explore the data set and give me some visuals on how you think this should be best visualized and represented. That can be good for inspiration as well to go then maybe build that yourself. Or maybe you just got what you needed and you're good. Maybe it's like more one-off analysis, but it's helpful with visualization. I've gotten some helpful scatter plots, and I never really know when to use a scatter plot. It's like, these aren't really useful to me, maybe with keyword visualization, but ChatGPT has given me some inspiration a couple of times. I'm like, okay, that actually makes sense to use it and that's a helpful visual. So that's another great way, I think, to use it.
Yeah, those are good examples. Speaking of Jim Stern, and for those who don't know Jim Stern, he founded the Analytics Association, heads up the Analytics Summit, and he's an analytics guru. He said months ago that analytics is really a statistical probability, right? That's really what you're doing, is you're creating a statistical probability of an outcome based on the data. So with that, where is AI going to help provide better probabilities, statistical probabilities? Obviously the visualization, but where do you think it's going to go in the near future to create better probabilities?
I think it can definitely help with more of the trends and the patterns, because I wouldn't really use it for accuracy, with something at the final piece of like, okay, I'm going to send this off to my boss or my client. I would use it to help. I mean, it's a generative AI and image machine learning in general is amazing at spotting those trends and patterns. And so I try to use Looker Studio with a defined question to best visualize those trends and patterns. But there's many times when either we didn't ask the question in the first place, or maybe it was like, hey, we have a ton of UA data and we have a ton of GA4 data, and that's going to take a long time to like match those together. Maybe if you just feed it two big CSVs or just dump everything into BigQuery and you can give it access to that, then you can ask generative AI to be able to, okay, this is what we have. I usually, a trick too is either it's in GA4 or it's in BigQuery, but I'll copy the schema. Like it's really easy in BigQuery to literally just copy all of the schema, and I feed it to ChatGPT and I'm like, okay, explain these dimensions to me. Tell me these to make sure you know what this is. Explain them to me. And that's when I correct it and I say, no, you're wrong here. And then, and only then, I'm ready to proceed and ask it the question. So you can't just assume it knows what a page location dimension is. Like, what if it thinks that's a landing page and it's not? Totally different dimension, right? So making sure we're clear on what you're looking at ChatGPT, and make sure I know that you're smart, and make sure I know that you understand the question, and then it can perform the analysis. But it's amazing at looking over, tens of millions of rows of data. Usually when I start with a client and they have a lot of historical data, usually I start with that to best understand the business better that way. I think that's one of the better ways to help understand that.
Yeah, we've started playing around with it with some of our data, our review data, and asking it questions, and it pulls out some incredible, information that you wouldn't be able to see if you're just looking at reviews individually, right?
Right.
But when you ask it questions and it pulls back the information, you're like, wow, That's really cool. You can start to see trends. It answers questions collectively. It tells you, this company's really good at this. They're bad at this, according to what their customers are saying, right? It's really fun.
Love that use case. Yeah. I mean, but everyone probably wants to read over all the reviews, but obviously we only have so much time. And so what a great use case for that. Probably maybe even for competitors too, obviously not just your own, but I'm sure you probably were referencing that as well.
Yeah. There's a lot of things. Once you start to go under the surface, you're like, wow, this is a deep hole you can go down, right?
Yeah. That's where
careful that you don't go too far down the rabbit hole.
Well, that's the funny thing is that's why I emphasize the planning phase of the data part, because when I first started, I went straight into the tool, right? I didn't have any questions at all. I was just let me just go look in the tool. And 3 hours later, you come out with more questions than you went in with. And so that's just, the importance of going in with a question, or at least a general question, to be able to answer that. So crucial.
Right. So when you're first meeting with a client, first off, I'm curious to how knowledgeable are your clients when they're coming in to talk to you or to meet with you up front? Because, I mean, to me, analytics is still almost just up over my head because I just don't live in that space every day. And then are people measuring the right types of things when they come to you? Or what are the things that they should be looking for?
Yeah, it's interesting to say that, because that's again coming back to what I had mentioned. The most important part of what I feel is it has been the most important part is the planning phase, but it continues to be even more important because there's so many more things to track. There's so many more options. Should I do server side? Should I do Elevar? Should I do GA4 in general? So I think the planning phase is crucial. And that's usually, I usually tell clients 2 things I need from them to do in order to engage with me, or 3 things. 3 things have to be true. You have to have the existing questions. I can help you find questions, but you have to have pain, and you have to have these are the things I want to know. Sometimes it's I kind of joke. It's maybe they haven't failed enough to understand the value of proper analytics setup. And so you have to have the existing questions, and I will supplement those with you. You have to install the GTM code on the entire user journey on the site. We use GTM to track things. And then we have to have a kickoff call. I usually have a 90-minute kickoff call where we dig deep on business questions. I don't say analytic questions. It's a differentiator. I don't want them to only be restricting their thinking to, this is a GA4 question, and then the rest. It's I just get all the business questions, because we can do offline stuff if we need to as well. We've done GA4 to HubSpot integrations, whatever the case may be, right? But we list out all the questions. We have a KIA process, a QIA process. And so it's question, information, and action. And the whole point is we've had questions before where it's we want to know bounce rate on the homepage. And so that's the question. The information are the metrics and dimensions you need to be able to answer that question. And then the A is for not answer, it's for action. And this is really the important part. We want to map questions to actions. And a great example is if they want to know bounce rate on the homepage, and I say, okay, let's just pretend it's 40%. I would say to the client, what do you do with that? And if they can't immediately answer what they would do with that, we keep the question still, but we put it on the backlog, because that's probably more of a vanity metric question. I can't really act with this. And the whole point is let's push the questions that the answers lead to action towards the top. Because if you were to say, hey, my PPC data only converts at 0.2%, that's a problem. We need to figure out why that's not doing that. And so we listed all the questions, and then we want to make sure those lead to the actions. And those are the ones that they're by definition going to be acting on. And I think Jim Stern might have mentioned this before too. I've heard him say there's only potential value in data. If you don't do anything with the data, if I do an amazing setup of your Google Analytics 4 and you don't do anything with it, then you're literally going to make no money, because you have to act. Otherwise, you have to test, right?
Yeah. That's the whole idea is using the data to create a better hypothesis, to do better split testing, so you can optimize conversion rate or the time on page or click through or whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. If you don't know what the goal is, then you certainly can't create intelligent tests to optimize that goal.
Right. And I don't even know if I mentioned this originally. So we started out as a CRO agency, and people would, back then it was more me going out to those people and saying, hey, let's work together. It wasn't a lot of inbound to start as it goes, but they said, yeah, CRO sounds amazing. We want to be able to use data to make more conversions, et cetera. And almost, like, I would say 90+% of the people, they didn't know what the definition of their conversion rate was. It was very clear they needed analytics. They did not need CRO to start. No, let's take a step back. Let's do so that's where it caused me to go and learn analytics to a deep level. And that still is usually the case today. People run to optimization. We all want to run to it. But if we're not clear on what we're optimizing and why, and all that historical data, having confidence in that, that's the key part.
I never thought of that.
Yes. We both went through the AI course, right? And Boss Bouders was really big on, you've got to back up and decide the baby steps, the micro conversions, before you ever get to the macro, right?
Right.
Because more conversions, what does that mean? That means you got to start back. I need more clicks. I need more click through from the homepage or the category page to the PDP to the checkout. Right. Each of those is an optimization opportunity. You can't just say, I want more.
Right.
Okay. Let's go all the way to the beginning.
100%.
But all the impediments along the way.
That's still the thing I see the most people not doing. They what I like to use they track the end sale. They forget what in order to get the end sale, we first have to get the awareness sale, and then we have to get the engagement sale, and then we'd be eligible for the complete sale, the conversion sale. But they just look at the end sale usually. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the big miss. Everyone wants to go to the bottom of the funnel, the last click, but forget that it's a journey. And there's 10, 15, 30 steps that precede that last click, add to cart, buy now.
Right.
And, right. If you don't address the entire journey, or we call it conversion path, then you're certainly going to affect the end result.
Right. Absolutely.
Hey, so I got a question. Where does split testing come into play? And what people now that Google shut their split testing service off?
Yeah, good old Google Optimize. That was fun for a while, and I guess about a year ago that kind of happened. But you probably have to. You could technically build your own. I met up with a local guy in Denver who he uses his own code to run tests for his clients, and that's possible. But you have to also support it, so that's a little bit more complicated. You probably should use a tool if you value your time if you're not a developer. So going back to the marketing measurement framework, plan, build, launch, forecast, and then optimize. So usually optimization is towards the end. I would say though that there is a place for they're called heuristic audits, website best practice audits. I do believe strongly that you don't have to just wait till your data is perfect. Of course, there's no such thing as perfect data, but it's because it's an ongoing, measurement's a department, it's not a project, right? But I do think there's room to work with a CRO professional agency to go through an initial, usually like a heuristic audit. We call it a conversion diagnostic. We just kind of have a system. We kind of hook your website up to a system to understand, how much opportunity is there to start with a diagnostic and implement those findings, and then get into testing. Because I'd say something to be mindful of. If your win rate is over 60%, early on, that means you're either not setting good enough hypotheses, or you probably missed out on the opportunity to do a heuristic audit. I mean, it kind of depends on where you are at in your CRO journey. But most good CRO departments are at like a 40 to 50% win rate. I mean, obviously Amazon's at 9% probably at this point, and they've been testing forever, right? So don't think you have to wait until you do this forensic analytics setup to optimize. There are some best practices I feel like that can be applied. We use different things. We look at the Baymart Institute they obviously have a ton of e-commerce recommendations. And so there's like great example as a client, they had literally, I think 6 or 7 different contrasting CTAs in the PDP page. And I actually had to look for the add to cart. They're all different colors too. So there's no consistency. So it's like, you're really kind of competing for attention here. It's like being in a room and 5 other people are talking at you. It's like, you don't have to test to know you should have one person talk at a time, basically, right? So.
I know this is going to be a tough question because the answer is going to be, it depends, right, on your goals and website, et cetera. But if you're looking at an e-commerce website, what would you say are the most critical analytics to look at?
Yeah, I would actually go back to kind of what I was commenting on before, Dwayne, with the sort of the middle analytics. And so I like to say we have a kind of frameworks for lots of different things. We have an ACE framework to set up goals that aren't just over indexing at the bottom of the funnel. So it's aware, it's complete, and it's engaged goals is the ACE, what ACE stands for. So awareness goals are generally when they're, getting sort of indoctrinated to your brand, visiting your homepage, maybe a blog page of you that was led by SEO. So those are generally awareness goals. The complete goals are the sale, maybe joining your newsletter or some kind of a form-based goal, but it's usually the sale for the most part. And then the engagement goals, there's usually a lot more of these. Like there's usually 1 or 2 awareness goals, usually 1 or 2 complete goals. But there's a lot of different engagement goals that I think are very valuable to set up, from scroll, combination of scroll and element visibility is a big one we like to look at. So oftentimes on a sales page, people will, they'll have traffic coming to a sales page. And let's say the CTA, the offer and the pricing is at more like middle of the page. So there's a big difference between, right, visitors coming to the page and not scrolling at all, not seeing the offer and leaving versus seeing the offer and leaving. So a lot of people don't differentiate that. They're just like, well, this offer must not have worked. Well, what if I told you 90% of those people never saw the offer? Like that's a completely different thing than people seeing the offer and leaving. That would tell me I need to change the offer, right? So some of those things are pretty important. I like to use real life analogies and some offline examples. So most people I work with, they measure the page view and the conversion and nothing in between. That would be pretty similar to me coming home from work and asking my girlfriend, hey, how did your day go? And she starts talking about how her day went. And I kind of daydream and never done that before, of course, but daydream and doze off a little bit, right? And at the end of it, she's like, well, that's why I'm going to quit work next week. And I didn't listen to the whole story in between. Like we would never do that in real life, but we do it a lot online. And so we're missing the story in that conversation.
Love that analogy. That's perfect.
Yeah, we've done some heat map testing, and what you're saying has a lot of validity because it's crazy how many people don't even scroll, past the top of the screen.
Right.
And if you have your call to action even a few pixels below, you could miss out on 80% of your, of people even seeing your butt.
Great point.
Yeah.
And you're making changes that aren't validated. You're just making changes based on kind of like random acts of marketing, right? So I like to call them yeah. I love the quality. What do you guys refer to as, I need to find a good word for the heat mapping tools. I usually just call them qualitative tools, I guess, because they do more than just heat mapping, right? Like Microsoft Clarities, Hotjars. Do you have a good name for those?
Yeah, that's
behavior
good.
Tools.
Yeah, user behavior, because you're looking at, sometimes they'll record user sessions. You can actually see mouse movements and real time on the page, what they're clicking on, rage clicking, false clicks, etc. So that plus the confetti maps and the heat maps and the scroll maps, just the quantitative data on how many things got clicked on per page. It's to me, it's invaluable. It's a great look at the real user experience and how they're engaging with each page.
And it could be a lot quicker to look at that data, especially like navigational stuff, right? It's just so much faster versus setting. You could do it in GA4, but just because you can doesn't mean you should always resort to that tool, right?
Right.
Yeah, I just call it heat mapping because that's what it was originally called. I mean, I know it's evolved a lot since then, but my old school brain just thinking about what it was originally.
I've called it that before too. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So do you think, is there anything that people should be cautious about when digging into analytics?
Yeah, I think they should always be cautious to make sure. One of the first things we do when we start with a client is I have a background in SEO. I still use Screaming Frog for every single project. It's a website crawler tool. So I will crawl the website in subdomains, wherever the user journey exists, to make sure that hopefully it's Google Tag Manager, not just the GA4 script, but that script is on every single page. I would start there and don't assume. I like to say instead of a QA process, I have a TBV, a trust but verify process. So instead of looking to make sure it was set up right, I look to see if things were set up wrong, because that's usually where I find more of the actual errors. And so I assume it's wrong, and then I go check to prove out my hypothesis. And so I use tools like Screaming Frog to but to validate that Google Tag Manager, as an example, is firing everywhere. We always find 404s too during that process, or other things that, hey, this page is dead. There's a dead link here. And so that's a good place to start. Not assume you just have analytics firing everywhere. And then I would quickly kind of get into those ACE goals, the awareness, the engagement, those complete goals, to make sure, of course, you want to make sure your sales are being tracked. Do a test transaction, UTM yourself, right? And see if those UTMs are actually coming through how they should in GA4 and Shopify and BigCommerce, whatever you're using, all the systems, not just one. So it's good to have data triangulation, right? And not just, GA4 is the source of truth. We want to cross-reference to look for those trends and patterns. And it's not, because it always is going to be, right, of GA4 says this, Shopify says this, Meta says this. They're all going to have a different version of the truth. And because that's just the conversation I've had so many times with clients. I like to say they're all right. They have a different definition of their, conversion. So that's why it's different. The important part is, if GA4 doubled in conversions, then Shopify should have doubled in conversions. And Meta should have. It's not about 50 to 40 to whatever the number is. It's just the ratios should be the same. So.
Yeah, makes sense. Are there any analytics tools or measurements that you think are less accurate, less reliable than others?
Yeah, I don't think so, because it really kind of comes back to the setup, right? And knowing, a lot of people, they'll maybe see inaccuracies between, Wicked Report said this and Hyro said this, and they say more, so they're better than GA4. It's really not the case. It's your setup. Everyone operates with basically first-party cookies nowadays and data layers, and that's just, if you understand how it technically works, then that's why I still use GA4 to date, because as soon as I'm not able to do something in GA4, then I may think about another tool. But it's as powerful as you make it, and so it's not about this is more accurate or less accurate. If that's the case, then we kind of probably get into that consent stuff. Then it's like a law, and then it's you can't do this. And so I think, again, it's about those trends and patterns. And if you know how tag management works. Again, I use Google Tag Manager for that, because you could deploy Pewik Pro through GTM. You could never even touch GA4, and I've still done a lot of those too. And so it's not like Pewik is better than Matamo than GA4. It's just about I think going back to my statement of, we don't need more data, we need more action. I think that's the thing I would say. People, like I said, I call it the A word. I have the A word and the I word. The A word is accuracy, and the I word is insights. People think they want insights, but they don't want insights. They want action. They want recommendations. Because you don't really do anything with insights, right? It's, interesting, and then nothing happens, right? So yeah, exactly. So speaking of experience,
yeah, absolutely,
yeah, exactly.
Deciding what it is that you want people to do along the journey to get to the end of the row. And optimizing each of those steps. Can we reduce copy? Can we reduce options? Can we reduce CTAs? Can we create more intriguing guarantees or risk reversals? All of those things have to be thought about if you're going to affect the bottom line.
100%.
That's the action, right? That's the implementation of, there's data here. People are leaving here. Why? Well, maybe the guarantee's not. Maybe we don't have a guarantee.
Right. Love that.
So, Ryan, can you give us maybe a couple examples of some success stories that you've had?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the, I would say, And I'll actually use an example that kind of gets into the to different types of data collection, into the qualitative side of things. We just did this for an e-commerce client recently, and it was a lot of fun. So we did an open form survey side, because they're going to be a CRO client in a couple of months. And we already did the analytics setup. We got a lot of good insights with, they not only had a purchase funnel, the traditional, PLP, PDP, and buy on the site through Shopify. They also have a custom form process where they sell kind of like the, those inflatable tube men you see at car dealerships. And so they sell a lot of those. And they also have custom ones that are pretty more expensive, order in bulk. And so you'd go through a form process that was pretty lengthy. Like, it wasn't just like a name, first name, last name, email. It was 6 steps. And so we wanted to show the data in a funnel view, and it really opened their eyes to like where they were coming from and how they were flowing through that funnel. So the setup of GA really helped see what was actually happening in the user journey, going back to the example of the lucid chart of like, this is what was supposed to happen, and then did it happen? So that was the first example. But the other example is the qualitative piece. And I love doing this. And so we took their buyers in the last year. They had around, I think, 8,000 or 9,000. So it was a pretty decent sample size. And we incentivized it and said, hey, let's make sure we get motivation, give people, we appreciate your time, Amazon gift cards to incentivize the survey. And so went to a type form and asked around 8 to 10 questions. There was only one that was multiple choice. It was what best describes you, and they kind of had their user archetypes, and so you choose that one. And then all of the questions after that were open-ended, where it's, hey, what's the most important thing to you when making a purchase? What was the most important thing to you when you made your purchase? And what other competitors did you look at before choosing us? So a lot of those questions where there's no bias in the answer set, and you get that voice of customer at scale, and then you can do things like use AI to be able to help summarize some of those. We got, I think, a couple hundred responses, and so it still is incredibly valuable to read those and manually code those. But that like is gold, because we already had the what and the how with our Google Analytics data, like what's happening, how are they buying, traffic sources, et cetera. But then this unlocked the why. This is like, why did they buy from us? Why did they not choose someone else? What almost stopped them from buying? We got that voice of customer, and that's stuff you could use in email and ads, not just in your analytics and your testing. So that was a fun one.
Yeah, that question, what almost kept you from buying, is critical. How many archetype options did you have? That's a great idea to ask them to self-identify their archetype.
Right. I think it was 3 or 4 different types of like some were marketing agencies and some were businesses, right? And so it's kind of based on who they identify themselves as. So yeah, that was. And also, I think too, you don't always have to just do a formal survey like that. Intercept polls, which is still why I use Hotjar, I still think they have the best use case for that. Exit intents on, if they're about to leave their cart, and they have something in their cart and they leave on desktop, that's a great question. Hey, what's holding you back from making a purchase today? Not a lot of people do that. They're so quick to 10% off, right? It's like, well, how about understanding the why first, So.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Understand the why. That is so true, versus just throwing more discounts when that may not even be the issue.
Yeah, so maybe you don't need to. You're just cutting your margins, by default.
Exactly. Just giving away money.
So it's interesting. The high level, what I understand from what you do is you help people eliminate friction.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So
I would say remove uncertainty from their decision. Yeah, remove the friction, and hey, we're making decisions that we're not super sure about, and I try to remove that uncertainty so it's more confident, and there's just it's more of a snap decision because of the data versus I wonder, like the whole marketing, I like to say, right? It's not always the best way to do things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, speaking of money, I think it's time for the $1 million question.
Oh boy, no problem.
Yeah, this is our trademark. So Ryan, given your background, obviously in CRO and data analytics, what is the one thing that you would recommend an e-commerce website do to dramatically increase their success, their revenue? Is there one thing you can share with the audience that, I believe this is what you should be doing right now to move the needle?
It's a really good question because of the forcing constraints of one thing and simplicity. So I think I'll kind of have a similar thread to my comment about the qualitative piece, because one thing in analytics is pretty hard to nail down. You should do all of it, of course. But I think going back to those intercept polls, those are useful. But even a lot of times when I buy something online, this happened recently, I bought something. The thank you page literally just said thank you, order confirmation number. That's it. I almost feel like maybe it's a little dramatic to say it's a crime that marketers don't use that space for something, but you could put something in line and ask them the question like, what almost kept you from buying? Because that's immediately actionable. Like you don't have to put the data in a dashboard. You don't have to make sure it's collected correctly, which is a lot of the stuff you have to do with analytics. You have to make sure all these things are correct. You literally just get the voice of the customer. And then after, 2 weeks or a month, if you get enough responses to that question, you can change up your question and you can ask something else. You could say like, hey, when did you first think about buying our product? How much time has elapsed? I saw a really good question on that recently where it was, forget how they asked it, but it was like, when did you start your decision-making process and how much time had elapsed? That's a really good question for look-back windows with your analytics tool. If months go by and you're only looking at weekly reporting, then you're not looking at the entire properly buying cycle, right? Like, so there's lots of different ways you can use that. Even if it's just how'd you hear about us, open form, that could be self-reported attribution. Maybe they heard about you from a friend and SEO got the credit of branded. Well, that changes everything, right? So
right, exactly. Yeah. Or what's the one thing we can improve on our website? Or what's the one thing you like most about our website? Or who else did you compare us to?
100%.
So you know what the true competitive set is.
Right.
Yeah. The number one benefit you wanted to get from this product or your experience today.
Right. So you get to those jobs to be done a little bit more so, right? Yeah.
Yeah. That's exactly what we do at Shopper Approved, Ryan. I don't know if you know that, but we have a survey that comes up on the thank you page for that exact reason, because we
love that.
One of the questions we ask is, why did you buy from us?
Oh, okay.
So that shows buyer intent, and then we take that data and we actually put that on the front on the website so that other people can see why they bought from that company.
Wow. That's really useful to just like use it not only for your guys' own or the company's own intelligence, but also helping future customers understand like that. That would be useful for me as a consumer, just putting myself in that mindset. I like that.
Right. Yeah. This is a form of social proof, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Totally.
Also, would you recommend us? So that's kind of like that NPS, right? But it's great to know what % of the people would recommend the merchant or the website.
Right. Right.
And you can kind of get your NPS plus your survey results.
Right.
So, yeah.
I really like NPS at different points of the user journey. I think a lot of people do it like after they buy, after they get their product, which is great, but also, especially if you can reorder, it's like, well, ask them in 3 months if they or after they reordered again. Don't just let it be static, So I really like that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's cool. So, Ryan, if somebody wants to get a hold of you, how do they do that?
I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so I think you could probably just search me. My last name is probably unique enough to find me. On LinkedIn, Ryan Levander, or else you could go to rednavelconsulting.com. That's my last name backwards, Rednavel Consulting. And then I do have a start here button in the upper right-hand corner. I put together like a growth assessment, asks a range of questions from analytics to optimization questions, about 10 to 15, probably take you 3 to 4 minutes. And then you get a score afterwards to see how well you are and maybe some ways to improve.
Cool. And that is on your website?
Correct.
Survey?
Yes, you got it.
We speak regularly at the Analytics Summit and other events around the country and world. Speaking about analytics and CRO and AI, and you've got quite a broad breadth of information that you share, and and background. So definitely recommend following Ryan and delving into some of the speaking conferences he's at, and like you say, LinkedIn, and check out your website, rednavel.com.
Awesome. Rednavelconsulting.com. But they'll find me eventually. It's probably unique enough of a name, right? You're like, oh,
They'll find
this is
it.
right. Exactly. Well, this has been awesome. I really appreciate the time, guys. Really fun to talk, and hopefully there's been some nuggets along the way.
Yeah, for sure.
We appreciate you. Go ahead, Scott.
I was just going to say, thanks again for being on the show, Ryan. And thanks everyone for tuning in. And we will talk to you next week with another episode. Till then, take care.
Awesome.
Anytime.
Thanks, guys. See you later.
Take care, Ryan. Bye-bye.
Cool. See you. Bye-bye, guys.